So yes, as Katie mentioned, I'm going to be sharing my research project looking at the impact of feeding chopped straw on methane production. So just a little bit of background on this. We know that winter feeding for Canadian cow-calf producers, along with general feed costs, make up a large proportion of production costs. And so we know sometimes over that wintering period, we're using some of those lower quality forages in order to help us reduce costs or potentially due to some feed accessibility challenges. However, we know from some of our research that some of those low quality forages can then have impacts on palatability, gut fill, as well as rumen fermentation for that animal. So in Canada and in Ontario as well, some of the most common bale feeding strategies that are used here in Ontario over the winter is bale grazing out in the field. Others will use a bale feeder in order to try and reduce some of that waste, and then others will use a bale processor. So talking about bale processors, a little bit about what they are and what they do. So they can be used for round bales as well as square bales. And there's lots of different pieces of equipment on the market. But essentially what they do is they're going to place that bale into a chamber, and then that chamber is going to rotate, and it has rotating flails, as you can see in that bottom photo there. They're going to be able to unroll the bale. A lot of the processors then distribute it into your desired location, kind of as you can see in that photo there, into a windrow. Others also are able to deposit this into a bunk, just depending on that certain type of equipment. So why use a bale processor? This is a little bit of a pros and cons list that we've taken from the Beef Cattle Research Council. So it gives some flexibility in the feeding sites that we are able to use. As well, it can help to reduce that feed competition. So we know sometimes when we're feeding out bales, if they're only in a small area, animals are going to compete for that feed. They've been known to help with reducing feed waste, as well as producing a more palatable feed for the animals. And if they're being fed out in that windrow, they can also encourage animal exercise if those animals are out on pasture. Now, some of the cons of some of this equipment is that it does require additional labor, additional time. There can be complications with the management of that actual net wrap or twine on those bales, depending on the piece of equipment they're using. And again, you're going to have to use that additional equipment at each feeding and then take on the cost of that equipment as well. So in our project, we looked specifically at the difference between processing and actually chopping the feed. So there are some processors that are going to just process that bale. So they're going to rotate that and use the flails to separate that feed, which we can see in that photo of that longer piece of straw. But there are other pieces of equipment that are actual bale choppers. So they also have knives built in with the processing of the bale. So they're actually able to then chop that feed into smaller, more uniform particles. And that chopping can help to create a more consistent particle size, as we can see in the photo there of those smaller chop pieces. So one of the questions we had looking at our research was, is this chopping actually better for the nutrition and the intake compared to the processing of that bale? Now, we know from some other research in the dairy industry that chopping of forage can help to improve feed intake. It can increase that NDF and that fiber digestibility, and it can also help to increase rumen passage rate. However, we haven't actually looked at the performance benefits for the cow-calf sector. In addition, we know that with increasing that NDF digestibility, that there's a potential to reduce that methane as it's able to be more digestible, and so we're having less waste through methane. But the impact of that forage processing hasn't been looked at in terms of methane production as well. So that was another one of our goals. Overall, our objectives were to investigate this bale processing and chopping technology and its impact on animal performance, enteric methane emissions, and digestive efficiency, as well as animal feeding behavior. So how did we accomplish this? We enrolled 82 multi-paris Angus cows, and they were enrolled approximately 90 days to calving, give or take about 20 days. And then they were sorted onto one of those two dietary treatments. So these animals were fed identical TMR rations, the only difference being that 41 of those animals were fed the processed straw ration, which you can see in that photo again of that longer, more inconsistent straw, and the others were fed straw that was chopped into that more uniform, smaller particle size. So again, these are the rations that were fed. We fed a really high level of wheat straw to kind of simulate that low quality forage, and we fed at the highest level that we could without impacting animal health. So again, the only difference between these rations was the actual processing and chopping of the straw, but otherwise all the animals were fed 33% wheat straw, 64% mixed haylage, and 3% of a vitamin and mineral supplement. In order to measure some of those performance effects, we double weighed the animals at the beginning of the trial, and then every 28 days after, the animals were ultrasound for rib fat and rump fat, which you can see those areas on that animal there. We calculated average daily gain based on the animal weights that were taken, and then we took body condition score with one person taking those measurements again on those 28 days. We also looked at a variety of feed measurements. So we had, you can see in this photo here, these are our Incintec bins. So they're able to weigh when the animal sticks their head in, it reads their RFID tag, and then it's able to weigh the feed. So we're able to look at their feed intake, the number of visits they had to the bunk, as well as their meal length. We also took feed and ort samples that were collected, and then those samples could be evaluated with the Penn State particle separator for sorting behavior. We also took emission measurements. This was done in 2 7-day periods per group, and it was 30 emission measurements minimum per animal that were collected. They were collected, as you can see in this video here, by the green feed trailer. So the animals are incentivized to stick their head in there, free choice, and pellets drop so that they keep their head in that chamber. And then we're able to measure methane, CO2, as well as O2 from those animals. So in terms of some of the results that we looked at, we didn't see any major differences in methane emissions, though it was higher for the chopped straw group. There were no differences when we then evaluated this based on dry matter intake. So when looking at grams of methane per kilogram of dry matter intake that those animals took in, there weren't any differences between those two groups. Looking at our average daily gain that was calculated, we could see that there was a slight difference with those chopped straw cows gaining a little bit more, but nothing that would be a significant difference between the two groups. Looking at our weight gain, similarly to average daily gain, we could see that the chopped straw compared to the processed straw group did gain more over that trial period, but it wasn't a significant value for us. Looking at body condition score, this is probably one of the most interesting results that we saw from our trial. We saw that the animals that were fed the chopped straw ration compared to the animals that were fed the processed straw ration were actually able to maintain their body condition score or gain body condition score, while that processed straw group actually lost some of their condition over the trial period. Again, this was then when we looked at those ultrasound results. Similar results were seen for our rib fat deposition. So we could see that that chopped straw group was actually maintaining or gaining rib fat deposition over the trial period compared to the processed straw cows that actually had reduced rib fat deposition over the trial period. We didn't see quite the same difference with rump fat deposition. There's a lot more variation in this data. So we did see that the chops, you can kind of see, gained a little bit more deposition, but not as significantly as we saw with our rib fat deposition. And likely we think this can be attributed to the result that the chopped straw group was actually consuming more of their ration than the processed straw group, meaning that this might have been a little bit more palatable for them to consume. This was also seen when we look at our feed sorting behavior. So we're going to go through this kind of based on each section of the Penn State particle separator. So those numbers that you're seeing down there at the bottom are the sorting values that we get from this. So if the number is negative, that means that the animals are sorting against this specific particle. And if the number is positive, it means that they're sorting for. And the larger the number, the more they're sorting against or for that specific particle. So we could see that the processed straw group was sorting significantly more than the chopped straw group against those largest particles in the top section here. Similarly, for our second section, one of our middle sections, we could see that then that processed straw group started to sort for those smaller particles in that middle section, as well the same that they were sorting for all of those middle smaller particles on that third section. For the fine particles, because this was a really highly fibrous diet, we didn't see any huge differences. Both groups seem to be sorting heavily for those really fine particles inside the ration. So overall, we could see that those processed straw cows were sorting against those large particles and sorting for the medium and small particles inside the diet more than that chopped straw group. Again, showing us that the chopped straw might have actually been more palatable to these animals. So in terms of our study, we wanted to give a little bit of context as well to what this would look like. So if these animals are being fed using this piece of equipment, what does this look like in terms of added time? Now, this was in the context of our study. So we were using this equipment potentially a little bit differently than how it would be typically used on an operation. But these were kind of the numbers that we were able to see. So based on the 80 head that we had in the study, based on the additional labor time, based on current minimum wage, as well as equipment running time based on current gas prices, in total per year, the additional time spent chopping this material would cost about $171.60. Looking at this a little bit more in context of a scenario and the potential benefits of this equipment. So again, one of our most significant results was that these animals, when fed the chopped straw rather than the processed straw, were actually able to maintain or gain their body condition, which we know is really important for these animals over winter. So from the Beef Cattle Research Council, they have this really excellent tool that you can use. Would definitely recommend using it to look at the differences in body condition score for your animals and anything that could potentially impact. So we could see that there's differences in preg rate that could decrease by 3% when looking at our goal of a body condition score of 3 compared to losing half body condition score there. So we have a decrease by 3%, a postpartum interval increase by 5 days, abortion increase by 0.9%, stillbirth increase by 1.3%, and a calf death loss increase by 0.2%. So when we look at the sale of weaned calf, so likely right now we're looking a little bit more at that $4.80. We can see that the value of those calves when cows are calving out at a 2.5 body condition score compared to a 3-point body condition score with the addition of that chopping and processing of the straw, that there could be a potential profit based on that maintained body condition score, $7,000 approximately. So then comes the question of, is a bale processor or chopper right for an operation? There's a lot of different questions that then come into consideration with this. So looking at your cattle's nutritional requirements, as well as what the nutritional quality of your forages are. If you're using a lower quality forage, maybe this would be a good solution for you. Again, how much time are you able to dedicate to that feed management? Where and how are you feeding out your forages? And what is your operation size? If you're a smaller operation, it might be a better idea for you to rent out this equipment rather than owning it outright. And then if the decision is to continue with purchasing or renting out a bale processor or chopper, some of the considerations then for selecting this might be the processing functions, the power supply requirements, the types of materials that are handled, the ease of operation, the speed of its processing, and then its cost and durability. There's a really good 7-point checklist for bill processors written by the Ag Tech Center out at the Government of Alberta. So if you have more questions, I think that's a great resource able to use. So yeah, overall, if there's anything I would love for you to take away from the information and our results that I've presented for you today, it's that the use of chopping low quality forages in a ration can increase dry matter intake, increase condition gain, as well as reduce sorting against large particles. So overall, we think that the chopping of forages rather than the processing of low quality forage could help to improve palatability, intake, and overall animal performance.